Sarangmat, who will be further elaborating on the role of adaptive DBS, which is a newer technology in advanced therapeutics of dystonia. So I'll take a moment more to discuss, speak a little more about Dr. Nagraj. So Dr. Nagraj was one of Dr. Uday Muthane sir's research scholars. He was working with Dr. Muthane sir in the autonomic lab in NIMHANS at the start of his career. And following this, he completed his fellowship in Bristol. He researched a lot there on botulinum toxin as well as DBS, and currently he continues to do this research while teaching several students on both general neurology as well as movement disorders and application of advanced therapeutics in particularly Parkinson's disease. He has several peer-reviewed publications, and with this I will request Dr. Nagraj to begin his session. Just a brief announcement: if the residents are interested in performing hands-on on the mannequin, please come turn by turn to the mannequin, take 10 minutes, and then please rejoin the session. Thank you.
Thank you for the kind introduction. Thank you, Prashant, for inviting. It's back home for me because trained in NIMHANS a while ago, and I was very fortunate to train with Dr. Uday Muthane. I found purpose for my life as well as my passion and beauty, because I found my wife in the autonomic lab. So I'm very grateful for sir. So without delay, I just want to discuss about, why do we need adaptive stimulation in dystonia? Okay. I've given my slides to the, thank you. So I'm going to briefly discuss about dystonia. I think sir has already discussed anyway, and how the evolution of functional neurosurgery for dystonia as an indication. We all know that Parkinson's is very well established, dystonia also, but I think we're still learning a lot. There is a lot more unmet needs in dystonia, specifically functional neurosurgery. Neuromodulation, again, we don't know how best we can deliver neuromodulation for every patient with dystonia. Often they are quite complex. We may see a lot of Parkinsonism with dystonia, especially in younger people, or secondary dystonias. And then how best we can learn the neuronal activity of the brain, because as a neurologist, you're most interested in learn about what actually happens in the central nervous system. I think now we got an opportunity to learn and understand more about dystonia and other movement disorders. It's very fascinating. And finally, can we actually practice precision medicine in dystonia using neuromodulation? So I'm not going to discuss about dystonia overview, because we already know, we've learned a lot today during the botulinum toxin session. I'll skip most of it. I think the first thing we learned from the lesional or lesioning GPI, I think we've seen a lot of patients in Oxford because Professor Tipo Aziz has done lots of lesion surgeries. This was 15, 20 years ago, and they have still sustained benefit, but they had bilateral GPI lesions, which led to significant disability as well. So which led to morbidity in terms of side effects from the bilateral GPI lesioning. So we're no longer doing it, I think, but most of the patients had a very good response. However, once the DBS has been approved by the FDA, so there was more practice of implanting patients with dystonia. Then, as sir said rightly, we do not have a lot of guidelines for dystonia, even though we got very well established guidelines for Parkinsonism. In UK, I think most patients who have complex cervical dystonia, if they are not responding to botulinum toxin injection after 10 or 15 years, or those who developed antibodies, they come forward for surgery. But not many of them would come forward for surgery because of the surgical risks. We know that dystonia is an established treatment in dystonia. Sorry, DBS is established treatment in dystonia, and we can clearly see improvement in the quality of life, as well as, we can look at the motor assessment using the well-established rating scales, and which got a sustained benefit more than 5 years. So this is Professor Aziz. We sadly lost him a few months ago, who's done, a lot of work on neuromodulation, lesioning surgery, functional neurosurgery. He established a unit in Oxford, which is now one of the pioneering unit in the world of functional neurosurgery. So this is the publication from our own group. This is in 2014. Clearly shows that we can see the electrodes, even the MRI that was taken approximately 10 years ago. So we can see the leads in GPI, so we can visualize better. I'll briefly tell you about this, and then we can see why we need to know about the anatomy more, especially when we want to learn about adaptive stimulation. Again, we can see the scores are, there is a sustained benefit even after 5 years. This is one of a postdoc looked at retrospectively the patient with cervical dystonia, look at the connectivity, who responded well, who didn't. We can see most of the patients who got active contacts, that's in red, showed an improvement in the cervical dystonia. So they're closer to the GPI. So we have a fantastic scanner in Oxford, which is a high-resolution CT scan, where we published it recently. We can see the electrodes clearly. This is one of the Boston Scientific electrode. We can see the leads. We can see the contacts, which are segmented, as we can see. And we can also see the marker, which is very useful for directionality. This is, again, we can see the segmental level as well, which is very important for us to understand how best we can implant, how best we can visualize, and then deliver the therapy. So what are the recent advantages? I think there are a lot of advances in the DBS world in the last 5 to 10 years. So we're using more latest MRI imaging, which is 3T, which is enough to visualize the GPI, STN, and almost thalamus as well. We are using DTI, this is diffusion tensor imaging, which gives us very well established network of the brain. We can understand better as a neurologist with the help of our neurosurgical colleagues and MDT. We can visualize the DBS electrodes, as we saw in the published literature in the last slide. We can also learn a lot more from directional electrodes, how best we can deliver or steer the current so that we can minimize the side effects. One of the biggest thing is in neuromodulation or Botox, or if you take anything, is important to understand that any of these therapies do have side effects. Improving the side effects is more important. So the technology helps you to minimize the side effects. And that's what, helpful how to actually improve that care. More recently, sensing electrodes from the Percept, that's Medtronic devices, have got we can actually look at the LFP from the patients who are actually chronically implanted. Before in Oxford, we used to do the externalization, means patients who have surgery would be admitted for weeks together to look at the LFP, local field potentials, from either STN, mostly from STN, but we have done from few on dystonia as well. So from that, we learned a lot, how does vary, the neuronal activity varies from day to day, day and night, when you take medication, when you don't take medication, when you're switched on, switched off. So it's very helpful, but now we got in situ, so you can remotely access all those information without actually subjecting to the patient all these, like inpatient stay, externalization, risk of infection, and so on. So I think we want to understand why we want adaptive stimulation. So this is a young girl with the rare genetic mutation. She was transferred one of the intensive care unit from a neighboring hospital for urgent DBS because she was on maximal medication. She was having retrocolis, oculogyric crisis. She was, by then, she was completely normal until the age of 13, and then afterwards she regressed a lot. She developed more dystonic symptoms, and she then developed Parkinsonian symptoms as well. She responded to a certain extent, but there is not a lot of improvement with just oral therapy. She was on polypharmacy, benzodiazepines. She was taking up to 24 milligrams. So she was transferred urgently for a procedure, and we have to do an urgent surgery for her. She was in ICU, so she managed to get a surgery done. We implanted in GPI, which showed a significant improvement. We do not have a latest video because we usually capture the video after 1 year doing an assessment, but she's significantly improved. She's eating, drinking, self-caring, which is a phenomenal, because most of the time in a year she used to spend time in the hospital with recurrent admissions. And she's come off most of the oral medication except levodopa and ropinirole. So, would adaptive stimulation would have been established by then, would have been helpful for us to understand, because we took months to understand how best we can improve her neuromodulation, because we need to find a contact, because often in dystonia it takes ages to find the right level of contacts, because we saw there are 4 contacts. You have to, each and every contact you have to evaluate in detail to see, because not like in Parkinson's or tremor, where you can reliably understand within 1 or 2 hours of programming of a patient after activation. Dystonia takes a longer time. So especially for the patient like this, you want to urgently activate and find the right contact and to find the right amount of current to improve their clinical symptoms. So can we actually improve the quality of life? What did we learn from Parkinson's? That's the most important lesson always. As we saw initially, FDA approved for Parkinson's. A year later, it was approved for dystonia. So this is our colleagues from Germany. So they've looked at in the implanted in GPI what is the neuronal activity, and we can clearly see that consistently there is a low frequency recordings you can obtain from GPI. So theta, that is 3 to 7 hertz or 8 hertz or up to 10 hertz, we can see this is consistent with most implanted electrodes within GPI. So then the author says that we still need to learn a lot more, because we want to understand the plasticity, what happens after you implant electrodes, because the neuronal activity may change, and therefore it's important to understand more. We're doing more randomized controlled trials or more number of patients worldwide. So just for the residents, it will be useful to go through these 2 papers, which gives a lot more information of pathogens of dystonia as well as neurophysiology. There are some PET studies to show there is some change in the dopamine receptors, specifically D1 and D2, and also which part of the basal ganglia. So does the oscillation represent pathology or clinical symptom? But we know that in Parkinson's, beta band or beta oscillation are almost now a biomarker. So likewise, in hypokinesia, we have seen low frequency oscillations, also a biomarker, but we need to understand a bit more than Parkinson's. So they've used, Sir was telling earlier on, where you can actually, implant electrodes both in GPI and STN. We have done that a lot in Oxford, where patients who have been chronically stimulated with STN for Parkinson's disease, they developed significant disabling dystonia, dyskinesia. They found it very helpful or improved after bilateral GPI implant. So we have a lot of experience in Oxford in implanting GPI for Parkinson's as well. But the electrode from Boston Scientific, which has got 8 contacts, where you can see we can simultaneously stimulate striatum, GPE, GPI. So we learned more from stimulating simultaneously all these contacts. And one of the things we can understand is there was significant association between the dystonia severity with GPI, not with any of the other things, especially striatum or GPE. So again, GPI is consistently involved in pathophysiology of dystonia as per neuromodulation. So if you try to modulate using neuromodulation, we can improve the quality of life, we can improve the symptoms as well. So there has been a further study from Haga Berman group. Again, they've shown, when we use the low frequency neuronal activity, probably basal ganglia is actually amplifying it. But again, they just suggested more studies as well. So I just want to share 2 of our patients who recently underwent bilateral WIM for dystonic tremor. They have a disabling tremor. So this was recorded on the day 1 following surgery. So they had a bit of stun effect. And we can see there is a clear change in the neuronal activity, and it's consistent. It has got a bit of low frequency. I don't think you can visualize that well, but this was analyzed using a MATLAB software, where we can see more clearly there is some consistency, because there was some stun effect already. Because we do awake surgery, we know that the patient responded very well, so then they get implanted. So we actually looked at the LFPs on the following day. This we can see in the second patient who also had dystonic tremor. So we can clearly see the low frequency peaks, which are more consistent what we published so far. And we know that from Parkinson's, this ADAPT-PD trial, which are a part of multi-center study. So Oxford is one of the center. So we know that beta band is consistently, associated with Parkinson's. Now, I think this week they're going to unlock the adaptive features, so patients can have dual threshold setup so that their Parkinson's is treated both day and night according to the feedback what we received so far from the patients. I think it's towards precision medicine, because patient is going to come back with events where you can look at the LFPs at various time of the day, week, months, and you can adjust the neuromodulation. And from the ADAPT-PD, what we learned is out of, I think, almost 94% of the people who were on, went from conventional DBS to adaptive DBS, they all wanted to continue on that. So it shows that it's probably a precision medicine playing a role there, because there is a lot of patient feedback and you're adjusting neuromodulation. I think we are nearly there with the dystonia as well. And this is from the clinician programmer, because you can clearly see this is a simple clinician programmer that you use for programming the patient in Parkinson's disease. You can clearly identify the peak, and it tells you, so that you don't need a lot of software that what we've used, because we have facility. But if you don't have facility, we can use the clinician programmer to program. With that, I would summarize that we can improve the outcomes in dystonia as we did in Parkinson's disease, but we need more understanding of pathophysiology as well as neuronal activity, what happens day and night, when they have crisis, and especially like we saw a girl with a rare genetic mutation, can we actually implant reliably and activate and show the benefit early on rather than waiting for months and months. And also in secondary dystonia, that's very crucial, because a lot of patients we can't offer now. We don't know much, do they respond, do they don't, because the GPI is actually, they have a change in the anatomy. So if you got a reliable neurophysiological biomarker, so can we actually implant and show that it can actually make a difference? So, and guide the neurologists and neurosurgeons on the team. With that, thank you.
Any questions from the audience here?
It was a wonderful lecture. Just we don't have access to the adaptive DBS. Just I was wondering, you are doing the dual threshold DBS programming. So dual threshold means, do you give a one series with like a beta wave, one in theta, something like that? Or how do you do it?
No, I think it's, again, it's just single marker. So you only track one wave. So it's usually beta because it's easy to, as we saw in that. So what the clinician would do is just use the beta peak. So we just trace, and then you look at the patient's response. So if you set up, for example, when they notice improvement and when they have a maximum benefit. So that's where the stimulation threshold will be within that. What we have seen is possibly because of the dual threshold, because it can activate if you actually got the beta activity go on, so that automatically it will, because we are not unlocked it yet. It's like your thermostat, but now it's going to, once it's unlocked, so it will actively stimulate with a higher threshold of current, so that the patient automatically improves, so that they don't have to switch on. There may be a ramping time of 10 minutes. It's not going to be immediate, but most patients would be happy with that. So dual threshold is only for one wave so far, but I think as technology evolves, I'm sure they can do it more.
So it's easy, like we can give you a range of 1 up and 1 millivolts above and below. So the error of improvement is just 0.5 to 1.
Yeah,
Easily they can
yeah.
have it more precisely, we can program.
Yeah, but most of the people in the ADAPT PD trial, I think they kept on the, dual threshold, but I don't think there is a lot of variation. But in the future, it may be, because what you need to understand is it can only sense and deliver, so it's adjacent electrode, contact.
Yeah.
So it's not going to be, you can't leave a gap or something, so you can't do the interleaving or something else so far.
No, what I'm telling you is, usually when you are programming, when you are going to program more precisely, we always give them a range. Like
Correct, yeah.
0.5,
Yeah.
above
Yeah.
the whatever the maximum
Yeah.
benefit, 0.5 below. So
Yeah.
the range of the range is between 0.5 up and down.
Correct.
So within 1 millimeter, like 1 millivolts, usually we can more precisely we can program. That will
Yeah,
be
yeah, so
more
far
useful.
it's about, roughly about milliamps, 1
Yeah,
milliamps now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
There are no further questions. We'll wind down this talk. Thank you so much, sir. It was very illuminating.